Good morning. My name is Hermann. To my friends, I'm known as Hermann the German. As you can see, I wore an American uniform, but I take it off because the uniform is part of my later life. So I wear a German eagle. I wear a German eagle because at 8 I joined the Hitler Youth. My father learned from a friend of mine that you could join the Hitler Youth at 8, 9. Usually you belong to the Hitler Youth when you were 10 years old. I joined it because I ran out of shoes, and you could not buy any shoes. So at age 9, I decided it was time to join the Hitler Youth to get leather shoes, because all the leather stuff went to the German army. So at 9 years old, I got a whole uniform. And the uniform looked like this. As you can see down here, that's how I dressed. At 9 years old was the DJs. This is exactly how I looked at 9 years old. At 10, from 10 to 14, you dressed like this in a Hitler Youth uniform. From 14 to 18, I have a problem with this mic here. You dressed like on this other picture. At 9, from 10 to 14, we did not wear an armband with a swastika on it. After 14, you wore a uniform like you see on your right, which had a swastika on it. So a lot of people don't know this, that that you, as a young kid, you did not wear a swastika. I was very proud to wear the uniform. It was like when you wore like in the Boy Scouts, you wear a uniform, you're very happy, you belong to something. We were trained to shoot rifles. We had a 25-yard shooting range. We sang pictures. We sang songs, and we learned how to march. So you can imagine, I'm 9 years old. I wear a uniform like this. I learned how to shoot. I learned how to march, and we sang songs. Now, nobody talked about Hitler at the time. And twice in my life, somebody called me a Nazi. But at 9 years old, you know, you're not a Nazi, because you don't know much about Hitler and all that stuff. The only thing that I saw was in the office that we were, there was a big picture of Hitler, and they said, hey, that's the Führer, blah, blah, blah. But otherwise, Hitler didn't mean much to me. I was born in Essen, which was the 5th largest city in Germany. It was the city where Krupp had the biggest factories and made all the big tanks, the biggest guns. Here's a big picture. We got bombed day and night. There's a church over here, and I lived about a half a mile from there. As you can see, what carpet bombing does. We got attacked 270 times during the war. The city was destroyed about 70% of the time. 70%. There wasn't much left. I don't know why they rebuilt the city. They should have just forget about the place.
I'd also like to let you know that
in 1942 was the last time I went to school. In the schoolyard ended up a wing of a B-17 with 2 motors on it. if the wing would have come down about 5 minutes later, most of us kids probably, we were in the schoolyard, probably half of us would have gotten killed. 2 days later, there was no more school. The parents got too upset. They said that makes no sense to send the kids to school when they had daytime bombing raids. So 2 days later, no more school. About 2 months later, Hitler decided to save the youth of Germany. All the kids, the girls, young kids, up to about 10, 15, were sent down to South Germany to the farms. So I was taken away from my parents and was sent to southern Germany where they had the farms and there was no bombing. 6 months later, my mother came and got me back, and she decided that if she had to die under all the bombs, that I would die with her. She was afraid that she would die, my father would die, that I would have no parents. So I stayed in my hometown in Essen under this mess for about another 6 months. I spent 6 months in bunkers. Every night we went into bunkers, which was an old coal mine. And I have a book over here later if anybody wants to look at it or talk to me. I'm in a stand over there. There are pictures in the bunker that I slept. And we were about 100 feet underground. It wasn't nice. There was water every night. You had to step in water in these bunkers. And but as a kid, you don't realize what war is. And I had no use from years from 7 to 11. It wasn't fun, but you don't realize really how all this stuff works. And your mother and father takes care of you, and it's just a tough time to grow up. Then as the war progressed to the point where we had daily raids in my hometown, the government decided that all the women and all the children would have to leave the town, and only the men could stay in this town. My mother and I, we got sent to what became later East Germany. On the way to East Germany, we got attacked by a train. We got attacked by fighter planes, because there was no more German fighter planes around. The Germans had fighter planes, but they had no pilots. And we got attacked by 2 English fighter planes. Luckily, we got a warning that the fighter planes were coming, and we got out of the train, and 2 fighter planes attacked. In front of the engine was a quad gun, and the quad gun let the first fighter plane come and attack, but it never shot. When the second plane started coming, then the quad gun started shooting and hit the second plane, and the second plane went down in flames right behind the train. Luckily, none of us that were on the train got hurt, because, like I said, we got the warning that the fighter planes were coming, and we got off the train. When we got, at that time they had the steam engines. The steam engines got hit a few times, but I was able to keep going. But it looked like a steam engine, all right, because the steam was coming out all over the place, but it still could go to its destination. When we got to this destination, we got off the train, and another fighter planes came and attacked. But since we were there, so we didn't care. Now, while I was in the Hitler Youth, like I told you, we had meetings on a Saturday. Every Saturday morning, I would have to go to the and put on the uniform and became a Hitler Youth boy. Most of the time, after they taught us how to march and to shoot, then in the afternoon we would go to the highways and we dug trenches, about 10 yards on either side of the highway. The trenches were for the German army to take cover when they were on a route in their trucks, when they got attacked by fighter planes, so that the drivers could jump into these trenches. And obviously, when you're young, you feel very important that you do something for the war. And at 9, 10 years old, you have a uniform on, and you do something, and you were very happy to do it. And you were very proud that you could help the war. For me, I was very proud to do that, and I think that everybody else in another country that helps the war effort feels the same way. After the war was over, shortly thereafter, I went back to, since the town was destroyed, I went back with my mother to southern part of Germany, and I got arrested by the French. I have a red pin over here. Where is it? Over here. And my father was a chain smoker, and he told my mother he'd rather smoke than ate. So and the French got a lot of cigarettes from the US, and so I used to pick up cigarette butts for my father, because cigarettes at the time were 5 German marks for 1 cigarette on the black market. So I picked up a lot of cigarette butts and we cleaned them, and then my father rolled his own cigarettes from the butts. But one of the French officers saw me that I had a red pin over here, and he grabbed me and took me into one of their headquarters. And obviously I didn't speak any French, and I had no clue what they were talking about. And so after 1 hour, they got an interpreter, and they said they would keep me for a while, and they had to find out something about me. And then they marched me for half a mile to some other headquarters. And there were 2 officers on both sides of me. Now obviously I'm this tall, right? I'm 8, 9 years old, and they constantly, they looked at me, and they always put their eyes on the side where I had this pin. And finally I realized what they were looking at. So when they were looking at me at one point, I took the red pin, I threw it away. Okay, so when we get to this headquarters, they saluted some officer and must have talked about this red pin. And this officer must have told him, where's the red pin? And these guys, they were surprised as, you know, as the man from the moon, because now I had no red pin. So then the interpreter came and said to them, asked me what happened to the red pin. And I said, well, I dropped it. And they said, why did you drop it? I said, well, they constantly were looking at it. So I had to trace my steps, and I had to pick up the red pin. Now the story of the red pin was this, that right after the war, in the town of Aachen, which is on the Belgian border, there was a Hitler Youth outfit that that blew up American trucks. Okay, these guys apparently were little nuts, and that they forgot that the war was over. Okay, and obviously I didn't know that. Okay, that there was a unit that did that. So they asked me, well, how come you have this pin? And I said, well, in school, I said, we use this pin and we put the pieces of paper on back of some of the guys that weren't quite all together in school. You know, I think you guys did that over here too. Some guys that didn't quite were all together, and so we put them when they weren't looking in the back of in back. So, but they never told me what it was all about. See, so they actually went to the school and asked the teacher and some of the students if that was true, and they said, "How did you get the red pin?" I said, "Well, my mother is a seamstress." And the good part is they never asked about the kids in school, because some of the kids in school knew that I was in Hitler Youth, because I had a full uniform, and on Saturdays I put the uniform on while the war still was on. And in this little town, I was one of the few guys that had a full Hitler uniform, because I came from the big city. So once they found out that that was the truth, that I had this pin only for school services, right? Not for the Hitler Youth. They let me go after 12 hours. But if they would have found out that I actually wasn't a Hitler Youth, they probably would have locked me up as a 9-year-old kid for the next 2 years or what. So I was lucky that nobody found out that I wasn't a Hitler Youth at that time. But that was the signal, or the identification that the Hitler Youth boys had back in the general area where I came, to blow up American trucks, so they knew where they were. And now, fast forward, that's why I wore the uniform when you saw me. I came to this country in 1952. People asked me, why did you come to this country? I said, well, I wanted to be on a winning side for a change. Okay? So I went, I only spent 2 months here in Reading, and the company that I was with, that I started with, the owner was German, and he says, we're going to Puerto Rico, and he says, you want to go with me? I says, well, I have no choice. I said, you're the only one that I can talk to, because when I came to this country, I spoke 2 words in English, yes and no. And I learned that on the airplane with the stewardess. When she came around with the food tray, she says, yes, no, no, yes. And so when I got to Puerto Rico, I couldn't even tell the difference between Spanish or English. The only thing that I understood was the Spanish sounded to me like a machine gun, blah, 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 blah. So lo and behold, in 1956, I get a letter from the government that they wanted me to join the U.S. Army. Now, I wasn't even a citizen yet, see? But in '56, I stepped forward, raised my right hand, and swore allegiance to the flag and to this country. And the moment I did that, I lost my citizenship. Because if you swear allegiance to the flag and to the country, you're no longer citizens of the country that you were born in. So I had a problem. I wasn't a German and I wasn't a US citizen, see? So in the eyes of the army, all of a sudden I was a Puerto Rican. And if you look at me, I look like a Puerto Rican, right? I'm a little too tall for a Puerto Rican, and I'm not really not that brown either. So I coined the word Germerican. I was the only Germerican that the army ever had. and I had a lot of fun with it. So when I was in the U.S. Army, I was trained as a clerk, and I was sent to Germany to an ammunition outfit 15 miles from the Czech border. And they put me in as an interpreter. Now, I never went to interpretation school, and I had a problem with that. And I thought, once I told the captain, I said that I don't interpret anymore because I had a bad experience with one of the lieutenants. And then they automatically made me, an order came down and they said, no, you're officially an interpreter. And so I was, like I said, I was stationed 15 miles from the Czech border, and that was in the top of the Cold War, 56, 57, 58. And the lieutenant told me once, he says, you know, he says, we're so close to the border, he said, if the Cold War ever breaks out, he says, all we can do is run because the nearest infantry unit was about 30, 40 miles away from us, and we were an ammunition outfit. So he says, nobody going to defend us. And I said, well, I said, you're telling me something that I don't know. I said, because if the Russians get a hold of me, I said, they don't take prisoners that are not citizens of, that are not citizens of the U.S. He said, they're going to shoot me on sight. I said, so the only chance that I have, I said, get rid of the uniform and put civilian clothes on and just speak German. And as you know how the army is, I typed top secret information, and I wasn't even a citizen. So he asked me once, he says, after I typed that stuff, he said, soldier, he says, you know what you're typing? I said, no. I said, I have no clue what I'm typing. He says, you're a good soldier. So I had a lot of fun in the army. I always said that to everybody. I said, how the hell you guys won this war? I said, you can shoot straight, you can march straight. I said, you can't do anything of that stuff. I said, I learned all that stuff when I was 9 years old. So anyway, two of my cousins died in the Second World War fighting in Russia. My father was in the First World War. Had two uncles that got captured in Normandy, but they got let go shortly thereafter. And one uncle, he was a master sergeant in the German army. He got captured by the Russians, and he wasn't released till 1950. He was a mechanic basically he was a car mechanic. And he was kept by the Russians, like I said, till 1950 to fix air compressors that the U.S. gave the Russians over this Land-Lease program. And he had to work on these compressors till they ran out of spare parts because of the Cold War. Or right after the war was over, the U.S. wouldn't give him any more spare parts. So the way he told me, that once the spare parts were gone and they couldn't fix any more compressors, then they let him go. But when he came back to Germany, he was a wreck. He had TB and he was malnutrition, and he died 2 years after that. If anybody wants to talk to me privately or what, because there's other things that I experienced, I seen, like over here with 9/11, I seen more destructions to last me 2 lifetimes. I seen a lot of dead people. I have an exhibit over there. Excuse me. I have an exhibit over there of Hitler used memorabilia. Some of it is my personal stuff. I have a book on Essen where you can see destructions. There is the bunker that I was in. There's my mother. You can see my mother in the ruins. So if you want to know a little bit more on my personal life and some other things, just come to my table. I talk to you personally. If you have any questions or stuff like that, I gladly answer them. I think this is the best country in the world. I'm glad to be here. I serviced honorably in the U.S. Army for 4 years. I would do it again, even so I'm 81 years old. I still would put the uniform on again and defend this country. All you guys that are born here, you should be happy and lucky that you were born here. There is no better country. And all you guys that wore the uniform, I thank you for it, congratulate you, and be happy that you, like I said, that you were born here. There's no better country than this country. So, what can I tell you? Anybody has any questions?
Did you ever see Hitler in person?
Yeah, I saw Hitler 3 times because, like I told you, the biggest factories in Germany were in Essen. Hitler, I saw him 3 times personally. He always came in an open car. You know, people say, you know, they tried to knock him off 7, 8 times. And he had a canny way of doing things. He knew when somebody tried to knock him off, he just made a left turn or right turn. He always escaped that stuff, except that one time, you know, in that bunker. And Krupp, we were the 5th largest city with 750,000 people lived there. And half the people worked in these factories. There were acres and acres and acres of factories. Today, if you go to my hometown, they built highways through this factory system. And the factories are still there. The factories was so big even, so they built highways through it. Today, Krupp is still as big as they ever were. Okay, they just couldn't, you know, couldn't keep them down. As you can see, what carpet bombing does. At one time, the city got attacked by over 1,000 B-17s. And like I said, the city just was a mess. And as a little kid, you know, living in that mess, I don't wear that stuff on my sleeve. I talk about it, and when you live under that stuff, you have to get it out. You just can't, you know, sleep with it at night, and a lot of soldiers, I understand, you know, they commit suicide because they don't talk about it. You have to talk about it and get it out of the system. So I go to VFWs, I go to high schools and talk about it. Over here in a half an hour, you really can talk a lot about it. But in high schools, I talk a little more about it. And like I told you before, I see 9/11s to last me 2-3 lifetimes. I see a lot of death and destructions, but I learned to talk about it. And in school these days, I have 4 kids that I ask them, what you learn in school? And they tell me they don't learn much about that stuff, okay? But I'm not afraid to talk about it, and we gotta learn from history. If we don't learn and we don't talk about it, we might repeat the whole thing all over again, okay? So. The lady said her mother was born München-Gladbach. München-Gladbach is very close to where I was born. Where I was born is also called the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr Valley is, like I said, is the most heavily industrialized area of Germany, and it was the heaviest bombed area of Germany. It's Cologne, Düsseldorf, maybe some of the towns, Hamburg, of course Berlin, Dresden. There are some other towns that you might remember that were heavily bombed. It was a mess. Germany was a mess after the war, but in '48, I don't know if you remember, the Marshall Plan was put in effect, but the Marshall Plan didn't really came to fruition till about 1954 when Germany started rebuilding. But by that time I was here already. If I would have stayed till '54, I probably never would have been here. My father's business, he was a master plumber. His business was destroyed 3 times, and our house was destroyed twice. So I had a chance to come over here, and I took that chance. When I came here, I had to sign that I would go willingly into the army. Otherwise, they could send me back. Under Johnson, President Johnson, he didn't like that thing. And of course, I had to have a trade. I had to have a sponsor. Under President Johnson, a lot of that stuff went pushed under the table. He didn't want guys like me to come to this country that could learn English, that had a trade, had a sponsor. Johnson said, no, we want other guys that don't know how to speak English, or can't learn English, that don't have a trade. Since I'm in this country, I never ask anybody for anything. I learned English, and I learned English in Puerto Rico, of all places. You can figure that one out. Most Puerto Ricans say, no habla inglés. So, you know.
So we encourage you to stop by and listen to
So what, anybody else listen?
Were you ever taken to the annual rallies in Nuremberg?
No, I was too young to, you know, I mean, in my hometown there was every weekend there were rallies from the SA and from the Nazi Party. There was some marches by the army, but very little. The army was too busy to fight, but the Nazi Party and the SS, they had rallies every Saturday, and you saw very little of the army, but the Nazi Party was very, very heavily, and also the Hitler Youth. You know, we had to march, and we were very visible. Well, we were proud, you know, like I said, you put a kid in a Boy Scout uniform that's brand new, all of a sudden you belong to something, you know. So, and I am not afraid to admit it, see. But you learn, later on you learn, you know, all the bad stuff that was happening. So, but like I said, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have served in the army, and I would do it again. Obviously, you know, I can't run that fast anymore, or I can climb big obstacles like we had to do in basic training. But I think I still can shoot. All right, thanks for listening.